to African Teapot Podcast. My name is Exie and I'm your host. Journey with me through Africa's vast variety of culture, heritage, and discuss issues most African families face, both home and abroad. Make sure you add this podcast to your frequent podcast rotations, and don't forget to share and follow this podcast. Hello listeners, and welcome for another episode on African Teapot. Today's episode is titled African Culture, and I'm so excited to have this topic or conversation with you guys. I was looking forward to it all week. And before I get into anything, just to have a mental check out here, like we say in the pidgin language in Cameroon, how far? That means what's up? How is your mental space, right? And mine was up and down this week. My week started pretty bad and it got better and then got bad again. But I'm looking into next week. And I want to carry this positive energy that I had, being so excited to cover this topic with you guys. I want to carry this positivity into next week. So if you're with me, like you had a terrible week, or you had a week that was just a mixture of both, you were happy and then suddenly you weren't, and things like that, please hang in there. You and I are going to take this ride and hopefully we're going to be okay. And if you had a wonderful week, I'm so glad that you did. I'm happy that you're sharing that positivity with me. I'm going to borrow some of your vibes and we're going to conquer next week, right? Before I get into anything, I'll just get into our proverb. Our proverb for this week says, knowledge without wisdom is water in the sand. And what that clearly means, or I can understand, is you can't be intelligent and not have common sense at the same time. Both of them have to go hand in hand. You can't be complaining about one thing, but it's both knowledge, right? Common sense and intelligence, it's all knowledge. It's all wisdom, right? I think that's what the proverb is saying. Anyways, with that being covered, I'm just going to go ahead and give you and get into why I decided to do this topic. And I think it's overdue. And today we'll just jump into my old safari jeep and just take a drive around the continent of Africa, just to look at those things that we love about our culture, look at those different aspects that we use to express our culture throughout this beautiful continent of ours. And then we'll look at those things that we complain or we cover from episode to episode, trying to make a difference and trying to change within this beautiful culture of ours, right? Because I'm going to state it here, not all cultures are perfect. That includes the African culture. So on this podcast, or in this space we own, when we enjoy and we try to express ourselves and try to invite people into this different culture that we have, like it's a variety. At the same time, we want to take this opportunity to impact change wherever we can and however we can, right? That being said, let me go ahead and jump into the different comments or questions that inspired this topic for this week. So I had someone who asked me a question regarding Africa, and that's what prompted me to ask the question that I asked on social media. And this person's name is Zane Pope. And Zane Pope asked me, what makes Africa one culture, and what makes it the fact that you are sure that even if a story comes from Zimbabwe, you speaking from Cameroon and your friend who is Kenyan or your sister would understand what that person is saying and relate to it culturally, right? It does seem like a lot of words, but I understood what he meant because he's not African. And I understood what he meant, like someone from Canada is different from someone from the US, right? So how is that person from Canada so sure that that person in the US is going to answer their question and relate to it culturally? And so it made me ask the question on social media, and it made me ask the question around friends as well. And the question was, what is the African culture and the things that we feel threaten our culture? Because the comments also resulting from the last 2 stories we did. One where we're talking about extended family members, and another personal story from Rita, the letter she wrote, to the show. A lot of people had something to say. Some people were like, how am I sure that I understand where she's coming from, since we're from different backgrounds, right? Like different countries. And there were a lot of people saying there that African culture is losing the respect that it had always had. Kids don't respect their parents like they should anymore. Parents don't take responsibilities like they should anymore. We tend to blame the men in the stories a lot than the women and stuff like that. And I thought the only way to do this is, first and foremost, let's understand what our culture is. Let's understand what this culture is in today's terms. Because one thing with culture is it moves from generation to generation. We can't have a stagnant culture. That can work either, right? Our culture evolves, and I thought it's time that we talk about it so that someone like Zane would understand. I feel sometimes connected to someone from Ghana, even though I'm Cameroonian, for other reasons more than just us coming from different countries, right? That I relate to them in terms of other cultural aspects. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not just coming from that continent, Africa. And if you want more information about Africa, if you're still asking those questions like, is it a country, what languages do they speak there, blah, 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 all of that stuff, please, I will refer you to the very first episode titled My African Pride. We do cover that in there. I do cover that. And I actually have fun facts about Africa in that episode, right? So if you still have those kind of questions, I'm not going to go over repeating them here. Just go over and listen to that episode after this or before, you're choosing. And then we jump into, discussing about our culture. I'm just going to give you guys some 3 comments that came as a result of me putting the question on social media, right? And one of the comments is from Auspicious Ori, and it says, I love our culture, but I don't like the fact that our culture does not put enough importance on mental health. I felt that was really strong, and that's important as well. We always make it a duty here to check on one another, and I thought this ties in perfectly. Culturally, we need to do more about that. And then Fashionista Girl says, it's a culture where respect to elders, regardless of the relationship, is held to high standards. But the negative side is it needs to accept change and realize that asking questions is not disrespectful. It's just the need of one trying to relate more with their culture. I felt like that was really good. And then there is one from Jinxie. And Jinxie says, Africa has a vast variety when it comes to culture. It has 54 countries and over 1 million subcultures. So it gives it that unique beauty. And some of the issues I would say Africa faces is that some Africans feel their culture is not up to standard when compared to European or American cultures. And I do think it is an inferiority complex. So that's what Jinxie says. And I thought these 3 comments were enough for us to go ahead and break down what our culture is, because you do see everyone is talking about culture. So now let's go ahead and jump into the question. What is the African culture, and what threats does this culture of ours face, right? Okay. So before I get into the things that I think threaten our African culture, let me go ahead and get some facts out of the way, right? Like, what is culture? What is tradition? And how culture is expressed in Africa. I think these things have to be explained so that subsequently, when we move from one ethnicity to the other, when we move from one problem that we are trying to solve or bring awareness to the other, you understand that this is an attack on some traditions and not an attack on our culture as a whole, right? If that makes sense. So What is culture? Culture is the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social groups. That's what culture is. And on the other hand, tradition is the transmission of customs or beliefs from generation to generation. I get you. So now let us go ahead and look at the difference between culture and traditions, because it goes hand in hand. I want us to be able to know what the difference is so that we can understand subsequently when someone is criticizing or praising something from Africa, right? So tradition describes a group or behavior from generation to generation. And culture is looking at the statistics of the entire group, which has been gathered throughout history. So the things we share throughout a group, the characteristics we have, that is culture. But those customs that are just passed down from generation to generation, that is tradition. That's why tradition can be just in a village of 5,000. And culture is like throughout Africa or throughout the country. You understand what I'm saying? So you have the chances of tradition being a little bit smaller than what culture is, right? That being said, let us look at those things that Africa as a whole, we share together. And those things that we share, but at the same time is unique from one country to the other or one ethnicity to the other. Something that if someone from Zimbabwe, when I'm talking about it being my culture, someone from Zimbabwe is going to understand it, right? One is the language. Africa is big. Like I said, I had to refer you to the very first episode. We have a lot of languages. And like Jinxie said, a lot of subcultures as well. So language is one thing that we use to identify someone. After their name is what language do you speak? And then I can kind of guess generally where you're coming from, if that makes sense. How they dress, how their economy functions, what religion, are they affiliated with? What values do they have? Politics, entertainment, what kind of food do they like cooking? What kind of music? What kind of movies do they act? Shelter, what kind of houses? How do they build their houses? Climate, is it just the wet and dry season they have, or do they have snow or not? These are the things that are common throughout the continent. If you go to Congo, Liberia, wherever you go in Africa and say, hey, what kind of music do you all listen to? You're going to have an answer, right? Everyone has something to say about it. That is what culture is. Now, traditions become different from one ethnic group to the other, and from one village to the other. The traditions are different. Again, traditions, I would say, this is the easiest way to think about it, are smaller than the culture. So you can't meet someone from Ghana and you are asking them about a specific tradition about someone who is coming from Nigeria. That person from Ghana would probably be a little confused. But if you're asking them a cultural question, then they will understand. That means a bigger question, a general question that falls under these different aspects of culture we've just looked at. Now, let's put that aside before it gets too confusing, right? Now, let's look at the things that threaten our culture. And I have 4 things down. For me, and when I asked around, I heard this a lot. This came up, it was repeated over and over. One of them is negative experiences with the said culture. So if someone has been burned, for lack of a better word, by a certain aspect, right, which most often it's probably going to be tradition, not the culture, but maybe there's a specific tradition that scarred them, or traditional belief or act that scarred that person or traumatized that person will probably not practice it, not want to practice the culture because they feel it's unfair, right? The second reason is the belief that the culture is not relatable. If you are telling me all these things but I can't apply them, or I don't know how to apply them in my current living situation, then it's unrelatable. I'm not going to practice it because I don't relate to it, right? The third reason that I thought was important is looking at the culture as primitive. which is what Jinxie said. If you already look at yourself low or look at what you are exposed to as being inferior to somebody else's, there are chances you're not going to practice it. There are chances you will not hold that culture or tradition in high regard, if that kind of makes sense. And then one of the last reasons that I thought is important is living out of that culture. So if I am African and Cameroonian and I'm living in the States for years, there are chances that there are certain cultural aspects or traditions and customs that I would not practice anymore because I don't live there. Right? That is, those are, in a general sense, I'm going to say these things pose a threat to our culture surviving. And one of the last and most important thing is passing our culture from generation to generation. Language is one thing that is greatly threatened by that, because I read somewhere and it said by 2025 the Igbo language is going to be extinct. And this is the Igbo is from Nigeria, Igbo language from Nigeria, and this is happening to so many languages in Africa. There are some that are already extinct. You don't have people speaking it anymore, right? And this is to be blamed on the tradition, because the tradition now goes from one household to the other. The tradition is small. Your mom has to teach you and you teach your own kids. If your grandma didn't pass it to your grandmom or your mom didn't pass it on to you, then that language can't keep going. Those are the things that threaten our culture, and those are the things that we ought to be looking at. And that being said, one other thing is, if we are trying to change the political structure of Africa, if you look at it, that's what's going on. If we are trying to be more religious, whether it's being Christian or more, or it's Islam or whatever it is, because we know the two primary religions are Christianity and Islam. So if we are trying to change religion, we are trying to change the political atmosphere in Africa, we are trying to change the economic atmosphere in Africa, all of this is culture. We are trying to change the way we use our African fabric. Now we're probably using it in making hats, making handbags and stuff like that. That means that the culture is evolving. But when we come to values, we don't want to change them to be practical, and that is a problem. So when I was covering the last 4 episodes or so, and we were talking about issues in Africa, we are talking about making our culture relatable when it comes to values. The issue is not that kids don't have respect. The issue is not the value in itself. The issue is how the values are implemented on a household, how the values are implemented on an individual. So, for instance, culture should be applicable. It should be freely expressed, and culture should not be suppressing. That is just what I'm trying to say. If you have a tradition that empowers one group of individuals and takes away from somebody else, that is what we are trying to change. When I want to put on my outfit, it's not taking else from somebody's outfit. So we are both excited to put on our dashiki. We are both excited to put on our agbada, or whatever you call, or however you call your traditional attire, your African attire. Nobody is being forced to wear it. That's why we love expressing it. Nobody is being forced to speak the pidgin. It is fun. That's why we speak the pidgin English. If you understand it, throughout West Africa, nobody is forcing you to speak the Swahili, so you are speaking the Swahili. Nobody is forcing you to eat fufu, so you want to eat fufu. It's a choice that you like fufu more than jollof rice, or you like jollof rice more than eba, or you like eba, you understand, you like ugali more than eba, whatever, you like chapati. It's a choice. But let us go to an extreme side. If we are talking about female circumcision or breast ironing, you understand what I'm saying? Or like in these topics where you have fathers who have kids and refuse to take care of these kids, and it's just burden on the mom. We are talking about traditions that foster that way of behaving, because it is subjugating one set of people and empowering just another set of people, even if those people are wrong. That is what we are complaining about. We are not saying it is wrong to hold a parent accountable or responsible for their kids, because moms should be responsible for their kids. But we are saying that both mom and dad should be. Both boy and girl should be. You can't pick one over the other. That is where we start complaining about our traditions. We are not complaining about the culture. The culture is perfectly fine. We are talking about those customs and those traditions that suppress one person and empower the other. And one thing I also want to say here on record is, if I am empowering somebody, it doesn't mean that I am taking away from someone else. If I empower our women to speak up, doesn't mean that I'm saying they should be rude. I'm saying they should speak up so that the men will know what the problem is. Because sometimes the men may not know what the problem is because mothers or women never said there was an issue. That is what we are trying to correct within our tradition. Again, the tradition should be relatable. Mom should be happy being an African woman. We don't want a situation where when an African woman steps out or sees another culture, immediately they want to drop the African culture. No, then clearly it means they're being suppressed by it. Clearly it means that they have a negative experience with the culture. That is what we mean. The culture should be enjoyed by both mom, dad, and children. You can't have dad enjoying the culture, mom enjoying just 30% of it, and the child enjoying just 10% of it. How do you expect the mom and the child to continue that culture if they are not happy in it? That is what we are talking about. So sometimes some of these traditions have to change so that the culture as a whole is inviting. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I have made you understand that when we are having subsequent topics about Africa or how we are relating to the problems, you understand that it's not an attack on our culture, like we hate our culture. Because you could hear from the comments, there is a love that people admire by it. But the problem is when you're trying to make that culture better for the younger generation and the older generation just won't let go of it. Or the older generation is forcing you to behave a particular way to keep the culture alive. You can't force someone to keep the culture alive. They need to enjoy that culture, be free to express themselves within that culture. There should be pride in that culture. Then that person will keep it alive. And for those of us Africans who feel that we are primitive, we are not. Because look at the dashiki and other aspects from the African culture that is being incorporated and copied throughout the world. We can do this, guys. We just need to stop thinking that we are less than adequate, that we can't do better. Because yes, we can. Right? And here I'm going to put a period. So hopefully this ride in my old, safari jeep, just to give a general layout of the things or different aspects of our culture that is fun and we would, subsequently give praises to, doesn't mean that we won't talk about things every now and then that we want to change traditionally. Okay? So now we understand that changing traditions doesn't mean that we are criticizing our lovely culture of Africa. So I'm going to put my pen and my mic off at this point, and I'll just have more information and pictures, because sometimes pictures do a better job in expressing certain things, and these different aspects of our culture. I will try to just put pictures up there, a little video. It's already on Instagram, just so you can look at it and visualize what we are saying, so that it should be like on this little safari tour you took pictures, right? So I'll see you guys next week for another episode. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening, and hope you join me for the next episode. You can always reach us via email at africanteapot@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram at African_teapot.